welcome to Wavescan, the International DX program from Adventist World Radio. Researched and written in Indianapolis by Dr. Adrian Peterson and produced in the studios of WRMI Shortwave in Miami, Florida. I'm Jeff White. Today on Wavescan, 100 Years of Wireless and Radio in Bulgaria, Part 8, Regional Radio on Shortwave, Radio Varna. We'll also hear about digital broadcasting on shortwave. The southeast European nation of Bulgaria lies at the edge of the Black Sea, a large inland sea some 730 miles across. The waters of half a dozen major rivers flow into the Black Sea, and the historians tell us that there was a time when the Black Sea was not a sea, but instead a massive inland lake. These days, the Black Sea is connected towards the Mediterranean by the narrow 17-mile-long waterway known as the Bosporus, which is described as the world's narrowest strait used for international navigation. The encyclopedia tells us that the waters of the Black Sea are less salty than the Mediterranean. The major Bulgarian city lying on the edge of the Black Sea is Varna, with a population of 1/3 and an inflow of 5 million tourists each year. The main tourist attractions at Varna are the many popular beach locations, the nearby hot water mineral spas, and the early Christian basilicas. Originally known as Odessus, Varna was entered in ancient times by Alexander the Great, and subsequently it became an early Christian center, established, it is believed, by Ampliatus, one of the 70 disciples in the early Christian church. The city of Odessus ultimately became Varna, and in 1949 it was renamed Stalin. However, on October 20th, 1956, the city reverted back to its more familiar Bulgarian name, Varna. The story of wireless and radio in Varna goes way back to the very earliest days. It was in the year 1896 that a consignment of primitive wireless equipment was imported into Bulgaria for experimental use by both the Army and the Post Office. Due to the fact that there was a major Army base near Varna, it is thought that some of this equipment was in use at Varna experimentally during this era. The first verified usage of wireless at Varna occurred in the year 1912, when the Bulgarian Army established a wireless station at Franga, some 15 miles east of Varna itself. This station operated in the Morse code under the call sign FRG, indicating, rather obviously, Franga. It was stated during the following year that Varna was the only town in Bulgaria with a wireless station. When international call signs were regularized in the events after World War I, the call sign for this station was modified to LZF. Quite soon after the end of World War II, a maritime radio station was installed at Varna with a 100-watt German Lorentz transmitter under the call sign VZW. The inverted L antenna system for this station was erected on top of two downtown buildings, Allianz Bulgaria and Netinvestbank. This new maritime station was inaugurated on December 12, 1947, and 3 days later a more powerful transmitter, another German Lorentz at 2.5 kilowatts, was activated in the second floor of the building Uchormansky. 3 years later again, Varna Radio was reinstalled in an outlying two-story villa, with the transmitters on the ground floor and the receivers on the second floor. In more recent time, two transmitters at 100 kilowatts were installed at the nearby country location for Radio Varna LZW, though nothing seems to be visible these days on Google Earth at the known geographic location in this open farming locality. On medium wave, a locally assembled transmitter was activated on September 10, 1934, with just 15 watts on 1276 kilohertz. The opening ceremony was held just 3 months later, on December 9th. Initially, programming was produced locally, though on January 7th of the following year, 1935, a program relay from Sofia was inaugurated with the usage of a landline telephone circuit. During the following year, 5 tons of electronic equipment from the Hungarian Standard Company was imported into Bulgaria for installation at Varna, and it was transported for the last stage of its journey on a large cart pulled by 8 horses. The first test broadcasts from this new 2-kilowatt facility were made on March 23, 1936, and regular program broadcasting was inaugurated just 2 months later on May 21st. The Varna medium wave station was renovated and upgraded to 10 kilowatts by the Hungarian Standard Company in 1952. A second medium wave station with 30 kilowatts on 773 was opened in the early 1970s, and 2 more channels, 981 kilohertz with 150 kilowatts and 1143 kilohertz with 50 kilowatts, were opened in the mid-1990s. However, by the year 2012, only one medium wave station in Varna was still on the air, 774 kilohertz with 75 kilowatts. All others had closed in favor of FM, at first in Band 1, though subsequently in Band 2. This lone medium wave station in Varna finally also closed, along with most other medium wave and shortwave services at the end of January last year. However, real interest to many international radio monitors is the story of the regional shortwave station that carried the programming of medium wave Radio Varna. It is suggested that medium wave Radio Varna took out a relay on shortwave from the maritime station LZW sometime back in the year 1989. This must have been sometime around the era when 2 shortwave transmitters at 100 kilowatts were installed for this coastal radio station in a somewhat isolated open farming area inland from Varna. In his monumental volume, Broadcasting on the Shortwaves, 1945 to Today, Jerome Berg in suburban Boston tells us that the Radio Varna radio program in 1991 was on the air on shortwave on Sundays only on the frequency 15330 kilohertz. Over a period of time, Radio Varna LZW relayed the programming from the local medium wave broadcasting station on several other shortwave channels, including 7400, 7600, 9300, 9500, and 9900 kilohertz. Initially, these broadcasts were radiated on Friday evenings, though subsequently this program relay was rescheduled to Sunday evenings, usually 4 hours in duration, as a direct relay from the medium wave and FM service. The content of the programming was made up from the Radio Horizont relay from Radio Sofia in Sofia, followed by locally produced programming from the local Radio Varna medium wave itself. This shortwave service from Radio Varna was on the air for a little over a score of years, beginning around 1989 and ending in September 2011. Radio Varna was noted as a regular verifier of reception reports, and many international radio monitors in Europe, the Americas, and Asia are the proud holders of a QSL that confirmed the reception of a shortwave program channel that was on the air only 1 day a week for a period of only a few hours on each occasion.
Времето и събитията по Българското Черноморие.
Радио Варна. Имате право да знаете.
You're listening to Wavescan from Adventist World Radio. Send your comments and reception reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the United States. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229 in the USA. Or you can email us at wavescan@awr.org. Our email once again, wavescan@awr.org.
Many of you may be familiar with the term DRM, Digital Radio Mondiale. This is the relatively new system of digital broadcasting that can be used on shortwave, as well as medium wave, long wave, and FM radio. DRM can make a shortwave signal sound as clear as an FM station, but a shortwave station has to have a special transmitter to broadcast in the DRM mode, and listeners have to have a special type of DRM receiver. And so far, those DRM receivers are fairly hard to find in most of the world, and sometimes they are quite expensive. Nevertheless, a lot of people believe that the long-term future of shortwave radio will be digital, and DRM is the only digital mode that has been approved internationally for the shortwave bands. Today we're going to hear from Mike Rosso, Vice President of Continental Electronics in Dallas, Texas. His company makes high-powered shortwave transmitters that are used by stations around the world, and the ones they make nowadays are all DRM capable. Mike is on the steering board of the International DRM Consortium, and he spoke at this year's National Association of Shortwave Broadcasters meeting about his company and about the current status of DRM.
I want to go over a few things. I have here about a dozen slides that I'll flip through to give you a brief update on DRM and some of the trials and things that are taking place with that technology. I'm going to go through a brief introduction, tell you a little bit about myself and where I'm from. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the trials that are going on and my world tour that I took just a few months ago, bouncing around from country to country, learning about shortwave and talking to operators. Talk a little bit about the receiver issue that still seems to plague DRM and some of the shortwave misconceptions that I've learned as I have traveled around. So, Mike Rosso, I've taken on the role of Vice President of Sales and Marketing for Adeomina. There's been some changes in the industry. I've worked 20 years in the broadcast television industry. My company that I'd worked for had built broadcast television transmitters. And we'd gone through the DTV rollout here in the U.S. I've been involved in a few digital rollouts. The first one that I did back in the mid-'90s was MMDS. The MMDS band had converted wireless cable systems to digital wireless cable systems for the Bell companies. And that was in the mid-'90s. And then I moved toward broadcast TV and then doing the digital rollout here in the U.S. And after that sort of slowed down and competition grew, the broadcast market became very tough to compete in. And I think you guys probably have heard that, Harris, their broadcast division was sold. Dielectric, which was a huge TV antenna manufacturer, they've recently closed their operations. Thompson has been sold off and broken into pieces. The broadcast business, from a manufacturer's perspective, is not really good right now. So it was time for myself to make a change. Well, Continental had done a lot with their company in diversifying and moving beyond just broadcast. So they began to look at the military and government and different other types of applications that use RF technology. So Continental, we're currently building transmitters for the Deep Space Network to communicate with the Mars rover and other deep space missions. We are building VLF stations for submarines for the Navy. We just built the largest solid-state transmitter I've ever seen. It was a 1 megawatt solid-state transmitter that we built in our facility. We're building also directed energy systems for different military applications. We're also doing RF heating. And one of the applications for RF heating is fusion. Most of our power plants that use nuclear power in the U.S. use fission. And fission creates nuclear waste and is harmful and very dangerous. For years there's been development work done on fusion, and finally there's going to be a 5 megawatt reactor built in France that will be it'll be the largest fusion reactor ever built. And to start the fusion process, you have to have plasma, and to create that plasma you use RF energy. So we're building the RF energy source to start the plasma reaction to begin the fusion process. So besides just our main markets of FM radio and shortwave broadcasting, Continental's done a great job of diversifying and going into other markets with our expertise, and that's why I decided to join their team and to help push the company forward. So DRM, of course, I've just joined the company in September, so I'm a bit learning as well about DRM, and I guess my update here is maybe a fresh perspective because I am new and new to DRM and new to shortwave. So when I started with the company in September, the first thing I did was hop on a plane and travel out to IBC. And at IBC, there were several DRM presentations at different manufacturers' booths, and they were pretty well attended. And one of the big introductions by DRM at the show was this DRM Introduction and Implementation Planning Guide. And it was something that they really put a lot of time and effort to create a guide so that shortwave broadcasters could understand how best, and other broadcasters could better understand how to deploy DRM. If you haven't looked at that guide, I suggest doing that. It really is a very good informational tool. I found it very useful to myself in learning more about the technology. And you can find it on the drm.org website. One of the things that I see with DRM, and maybe the key highlight, and I'm sure many of you have sat through, DRM now has been around a while, and I'm sure there's been a lot of presentations on the technology, and you understand the benefits of it and all those things. So that's not the intent of this presentation. It's more to give you a little update on some of the trials and things that are going on. But one of the key things that I see that gives DRM a lot of interest around the world is the fact that it is useful across the entire frequency band. When you look, you can use DRM 30 for your long wave, your short wave, and your medium wave, and you have DRM Plus, which is good through the VHF and FM bands. So you got one technology that can be used for a full deployment in a country. And I think that's why we're finding that so many countries are interested in trialing the technology and experimenting with it, and seeing its benefits is because of this one fundamental factor. And truly the technology is ready for deployment, and you can see that by the trials. So one of the trials I'm going to talk about is Russia, and that's actually the first place I went to was Russia. And when I joined, after coming back from IBC, I spent a few weeks at Continental. And the first leg of my journey was Russia to meet with RTRN. At the time it wasn't a very funny story, but now I kind of get a chuckle over it. But I got taken into custody in Russia. My visa had expired 6 hours before my flight out of Russia. Okay, so I go to the ticket counter, I get passed through, and I go to get through customs. And the customs person there looks at my passport and says, sorry, you cannot leave Russia because you do not have a valid visa. So I had to sit in custody until my plane left. They tore up my ticket, and so on and so forth. And it wasn't fun at the time, but I did manage to get out of there 24 hours later. But it's not my first time to Russia. I've been there several times over the years. But the first time I've ever had that happen, it was a little uncomfortable. But anyway, so I met with RTRN, and really the first shortwave customer I really got to sit down and talk to. And they've been talking about redeploying their shortwave network since around 2010. And they've been going back to try to get the funding in place to do that. And they're expecting the funding to be in place this year, probably late this year in the fall. But he was very impressed to show me the 50-watt transmitter that they had running shortwave over Moscow, and how well the signal was performing and how good the sound quality was. And it was very impressive for a 50-watt little transmitter running there in Russia. He told me that he wishes that he could just deploy all his transmitters DRM only. But he understands with the receivers right now and the expense of the receivers that he's going to go ahead and deploy them both analog and DRM. But he hopes the situation is going to change soon because he really liked the technology. It's really an improvement over just analog operation. And he said the coverage is better, sound quality, which is a recurring message that I heard as I traveled from country to country. He recently gave a presentation at ITU in Geneva, and RTRN boasted about how much better the audio quality was and the coverage. And as I said, they've been planning to do this deployment since 2010. and they're starting to get their funding in place. And that really has nothing to do with DRM. It's just due to funding in Russia. Vatican Rome is a place I would have liked to have visited. They also gave a presentation here recently at ITU, and they boasted, their trial was DRM Plus and Band 2, and they boasted about the audio quality and also SFN transmission. If you do digital SFN transmission, becomes a lot easier to do. But for shortwave, not so much of a big deal as it is for FM and other applications. They also had done some tests, and there's been some articles now coming out of Finland about a mobile receiver for DRM, which is interesting. I've been involved with mobile TV and in my past life, and I know antennas have always been an issue. So it'll be interesting to see how they plan on implementing this antenna. Maybe it'll be, I know for FM tuners, they've done the headset and plugged into the phone creates the FM antenna. Maybe it'll be something like that. Brazil, they've currently been testing for at least 5 years. Brazil, although I didn't travel there for a shortwave visit, I have been to Brazil many a times. I worked on setting up a manufacturing plant actually in Brazil to build TV transmitters there. Brazil is a tough market, and they do a lot of testing and a lot of trials, and it's a long process there to get approved. I know, just giving you some background from my background for TV, I mean, they did DVB test and ATSC test for years, and then they settled on ISDBT. So, politics, many things come into play. But all reports from there were the improved quality was very impressive there. They were supposed to make a decision around the end of last year, and it was believed they were going to pick DRM. All signs showed that they would, but then they came out with a report saying that they wanted to do some more coverage propagation test. So that's kind of where things sit in Brazil right now, but it's still a very opportunistic market for DRM. One thing to note is my top bullets on here. Although DRM has been around a while and it's slowly struggling to take hold, there are 25 countries now providing a regular DRM service. And right now, nearly half the world's population is able to listen to DRM. So, it's slowly happening. It's slowly happening. Norway. I did not visit Norway on my trips around, but they are doing a DRM Plus trial. They just announced that recently. DAB has just never really caught on, never really caught traction in Norway. I actually supplied DAB transmitters as part of a trial there back about 3 years ago. And I remember being told at that time that they would use them in a trial for about a year, and then they would have the funds allocated to them to buy them. Well, as of last year, they still hadn't got the funds to buy them. They just are having a hard time finding how to make the transition and pay for the transition to DAB. So they've agreed now to go off and try DRM and to see if they can build more of a market case for it, a more economical model to deploy DRM instead of DAB and to drive it forward there in Norway. India, I did visit India. I spent a few days there as well. India, they are a real proponent of shortwave broadcasting, and they began actually DRM trials in 2007. And just recently, if you've seen the press releases, they announced that they're going to they placed orders for 27 medium wave DRM transmitters. They, in several meetings and presentations, they boast about the improved quality of the sound, and they also like the added features of texting, providing text through the DRM signal for news, sports, disaster warnings, that sort of thing. India is really starting to become a really strong driver for DRM. With this deployment, this will be the largest deployment in the world for DRM. And they're getting, and I'll talk about this some more, but they're getting chipset manufacturers and receiver manufacturers now to to take a closer look at this. Could benefit everyone involved in shortwave and DRM. Kuwait is another. I find Kuwait to be very interesting. Radio Kuwait. They have money and resources to deploy DRM, and they had contacted DRM about a training course, and our partner Transradio went off and gave them a weeks-long training course talking about coverage and MER improvements, and got very positive feedback. Shortwave, like in Saudi Arabia, we just finished up installing 4 new shortwave transmitters in Saudi Arabia. There's a lot of shortwave focus there, and if they grasp on to DRM and start to drive it forward, that brings a lot of money to the table to help fund receivers and help drive the technology forward. So we got to keep a close eye on that, and that's relatively recent news.
That was Mike Rosso of Continental Electronics and the DRM Consortium. And we'll have the second part of Mike's talk next week on Wavescan. Over in Africa, Adventist World Radio is operating a total of 14 FM radio stations in 10 different countries, each of which is on the air 24 hours daily. For those of our listeners living right up in the north of Africa, in the Spanish enclave of Ceuta, you can tune in to Adventist World Radio on FM, and they are on the air 24 hours daily. It's from Ceuta in Spanish, English, Arabic, and Berber on the frequency of 107.7 FM. And AAWR President Dowell Chow told us recently that that station in Ceuta, which is an enclave surrounded by Morocco, is heard well into Morocco, well outside of the small community of Ceuta there in North Africa. And we end today's edition of Wavescan with some Bulgarian folk music. This is by the 17-year-old artist Nikolai Gorbanov, accompanied by the Bulgarian Radio's Folk Music Orchestra. Thanks for listening to Wavescan, the International DX program from Adventist World Radio, researched and written in Indianapolis by Adrian Peterson. Next week on Wavescan, radio broadcasting on the island of Cyprus, the local radio scene. And much more. 2 QSL cards are available for reports on this program. We have an AWR QSL and a WRMI QSL for Wavescan. You can send your reports to Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. That's Wavescan, Box 29235, Indianapolis, Indiana, 46229, USA. Our email address here is wavescan@awr.org. We're always happy to hear from you at wavescan@awr.org. I'm Jeff White at WRMI in Miami. Till next week, good listening.